This video is a memorial to my father, Gary Doucette. After planning this for quite a while and using a very appropriately helpful and kind letter from Bill Warbus, a friend of my father, as useful reference, I put this new memorial video together. Based on a photo I received of my father's model kit, this Procreate painting I made is of the 1937 Indianapolis 500 winner. As even the casual observer can see, the very old Indy cars look different than the modern ones. My father loved Indy cars and the entire Indy 500 race and its history. He was one of the greatest IndyCar modelers. He designed and created model kits of Indy cars, and this was one of them. The winner was Wilbur Shaw, and the 1937 race was the 25th Indy 500 race. In 1937, riding mechanics were required, and the one used here was Jigger Johnson, who became the second-time Indianapolis 500 winning riding mechanic, and the final winning riding mechanic in Indy history, as beginning in 1938, riding mechanics became optional and were no longer used by entrants. Jimmy Snyder, in that same race, set up the first lap at track record at 130.492 miles per hour. Late in this exciting race, Wilbur Shaw had lapped the second-place racer Ralph Hepburn and was about 20 laps into the race was when his car had begun leaking oil. The rear tire had also become heavily worn. The car had to slow significantly to barely cross the finish line. Both men suffered horrible burns due to the leaking oil. Hepburn, the second-place driver, had made a real effort to charge in to win, nearly caught up, and was within a few seconds of the last straightaway. There was nothing left to lose, so Shaw floored the accelerator to pull down the final straight, and held off Hepburn, winning by only 2.16 seconds. This is the closest finish in Indy 500 history, well, up until that point, but it also stood as the closest finish ever at Indy all the way up into the year 1982. My father also loved watching nature documentaries with me, especially when I was growing up, and we would always talk about nature. African wildlife was a particular favorite, and the one that we always seemed to enjoy most of all was the eternal enemies, lion versus hyena. We always loved any special which showed lions and hyenas and depicted the eternal struggle and war between the two species. It's always very interesting to hear about all wildlife that has ever existed, but in particular, we enjoyed some of these lovely specials with African wildlife. In the end, I didn't go with hyper-realism, and I went with more of a stylized version. After all, a famous quote from my father that I say all the time because it's so accurate is, "Art is representation, not duplication." Stylizing and changing things from reality in order to reach an artistic vision is an extremely valid art form, and in fact is what makes all the different art styles that exist. But you can also capture a certain level of realism and decide on how exaggerated you're going to allow things to be. I hope that this painting would honor my father and honor all of nature, the struggle between predators that fight each other in order to eke out a living in dangerous ecosystems, and the entire cycle of life. I decided to go with more of a green background because it was better contrast with the figures, but also because when the rains come, the grasses do turn green in the African savanna. We always considered the hyenas more of the villain of the story, and we would call them slime dogs, although they are more closely related to cats than dogs, but I no longer consider them necessarily evil, as all of nature is more neutral. A long-standing dream since I was 3 years old was for me and my father to go visit the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Natural History in Drumheller, Alberta, and here I depict a representational image of the exterior of that building that I always dreamed of going with my father. Someday I might be able to go myself, but I'll never be able to go with him, sadly. I hope someday still to visit it, because I think my father would still want me to. But I know it's unlikely that I'll ever actually get to go, especially considering the current state of the world, and the fact that I simply do not have the money to be able to, and I get lost very easily when I try to drive places. But I don't think I'll completely give up hope on ever visiting this place that seemed to be frankly sacred between me and my father. We always dreamed of going to visit, and maybe someday I'll get to go and actually see it, and draw pictures and take photo reference. But in the meantime, we both still always had an interest in paleo art, even more so than African wildlife, even more so than lions and hyenas. Paleontological interest was something very special between me and my father. Studying dinosaurs, reading encyclopedias, and watching specials such as Paleo World on television was always something me and my father would talk about. Whenever I do paleo art reconstructions and look at any and find out the new news, I always think of my father, for he'd appreciate it as well. I decided I had to do Darth Vader from Star Wars, a beloved interest of my father. He absolutely loved it, the fusion of science fiction and fantasy, though he would never admit that. He'd considered it a pure sci-fi, which is a little humorous. But I decided the Dark Father himself was something that was a little more necessary for this video. I think that he would have liked this painting. And now, watching The Mandalorian, he absolutely would have loved the series The Mandalorian. I can't help but think of him every moment I watch it. And now, for the man himself and one of his most beloved cars. He loved old cars, with 1950s cars being his favorites overall. This 1950 Mercury Custom Coupe was one of his prized projects and possessions. He reupholstered it himself after training and invented the special unique color-shifting paint and exact coloration for it, candy lime gold pearl. It looked more green in dim light, green gold in interior or more average light, and more of a pearl gold in bright light, being almost a white golden pearl in direct bright sunlight. I know it was purchased by a friend and hopefully has a good home now, with an owner who can appreciate it, as my father would say, an artwork or sculpture on wheels. He's always been an old car aficionado. I'm hoping his art overall kinds is hopefully in good hands now. Sadly, I was unable to go see him, and I only know that my brother sold his car. My father always loved and supported my art, and was very happy I was getting started on YouTube. He'd also be happy for my artistic growth. I wish I could share all my new art with him and send him letters in the mail like I used to. I used to send him at least 4 per year. One which was more extra in the early spring, late winter, one for Father's Day, one for his birthday and Christmas. Some years I only sent 3, birthday, Christmas, and Father's Day, but usually I sent 4. I would also sometimes send packages with separate gifts, especially if I could get something he would really like. I always would send him that large envelope with a lot of original art that I made especially for him, usually at least one original art, and custom-made cards, as well as prints of various art I'd made since the last letter. He would always call me up and open them over the phone and react, thanking me and commenting on each artwork I included. I'll never know what became of all my art that I had sent him over the years, sadly. I can never regret creating and sending it, however, even if it has all been thrown in the trash. And so, all the art here is art I would send to him, wishing I could still mail it and talk to him, wishing that I could make more art for him, and I guess I can, but I can't mail it to him anymore.